I'm Natasha Chilingarian.
I'm Michael Ogden. This is Shared Accounts with CU Times. Natasha, come in here for a second. I want to do a quick chat with you here at the top about journalism today. So let me kind of
Okay.
set it up very quickly. Every week, as you know, I'm on a press call with like Defense Credit Union Council, America's Credit Unions, every Monday. And the organizations, they just kind of talk about what they're going to be focused on for the week, Senate hearings, regulatory efforts, or just them complaining about the CFPB. But twist, they might love it now. But anyway, the speed at which news is happening everywhere, and especially in the financial sector, since the Trump administration has taken over, which we're just a few weeks into it as of this recording. America's Credit Union's chief advocacy officer, Carrie Hunt, said on our most recent call that they actually might add another press call
Right.
during the week to kind of help keep up with the speed of changes. But I wanted to ask you, Natasha, how you're feeling about journalism right now, because right now makes me reflect on when the first Trump administration began. It was chaos like this.
Sure. So you mean just from it, like, as a reporter, how crazy it is?
One, yeah, how are you feeling? Two, how are you observing what's going on? What are you seeing? Anything?
Yeah, I think it's kind of halfway feel bad for how stressed out journalists must be right now. I think in
Hmm.
our world, it's more on a small scale, so we're not out there, like, reporting on every single change, but yeah, with New York Times, outlets like that, it
Yeah.
must be just insane, but I think they're doing a good job, I guess, of keeping up. I don't know, I kind of feel a little concerned just with that news of the Trump administration rotating out. What was it? The New York Times and CNN? I believe, from the office, and then bringing in
Yeah.
Breitbart and some other far right.
Yeah, I think they kicked him out of the Pentagon
Yeah,
too or
so
something.
I don't wanna get too much here, but it's a little concerning. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then I guess another thing I wanna bring up here is just how
Hmm.
much journalism has changed over the decades from, okay, we have the evening news program and we have the newspaper
Hmm.
coming in. It was kind of all centralized there, and it was all about
Right.
truth and facts. But now with the internet, I feel like anyone can just start a YouTube channel, can start a TikTok channel, and just start
And they
spreading
do.
things
Yeah.
unchecked. And then some people are actually getting their news from there, and that's a whole other topic. But
Yeah,
it's so all over the
it is.
place and discombobulated, and the
Hmm.
oversight of things being all factual is kind of
Yeah.
off. So there's that with the internet,
Right.
is kind of screw things up there. So I guess I don't feel great about it overall.
Okay. I mean, what we're going through right now, especially Jim Duplessis and myself, I'll be working on a story
Mhm.
starting at 8 a.m. and then I have a 8:30 meeting, come out at 9. The whole story's changed.
Yeah,
The whole thing's been blown up. I've run into that probably 4 or 6 times just in the last couple of weeks.
right,
I'm like,
right.
"Damn it. The whole story's
That's changing
changed."
the way we work, even with these
Yeah,
podcasts. We have like
right.
last year where there were a lot of podcasts that we released, quite a while after recording them. I don't feel like we can do that now. So we're really
I don't know. Yeah.
making an effort to have the record date and the release date very close because whatever the person talked
Sure.
about could no longer be relevant the next
Right.
couple days. So that's
That
happening a
is
lot. Yeah.
very true. Yeah, it's a vibe that I had back in 2016 I'm feeling today,
Mhm.
which, eventually it did calm down, but god dang it, the initial days are so chaotic.
Really.
It's a lot.
Well, and also it's exhausting to even make yourself read the stuff and keep up with it because it's so. I mean,
Sure.
personally, I've been enjoying watching, like, comedy programs
Mhm.
and the
Yeah.
monologues, and then
Yep.
actually can catch you up on what the key things that have happened, and you can also, like, laugh about it at the same time instead of being
Yeah.
like,
That is
"Oh my
true.
god, I'm terrified." So,
That's
yeah,
wonderful. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I just kind of wanted to take our temperature really
sure.
quick before we get into this discussion that is really fun
Yeah.
today. So, anyway, let's get to it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Shared Accounts with CU Times. Coming up on the show, we have on a person we absolutely love and respect dearly. I don't say that lightly at all. It is Henry Meier, Esquire, attorney from the law office of Henry Meier, Esquire, out of New York. Henry's been writing for us for a while, different columns, commentaries about regulatory issues. God, we had a great time with him, and we
Yeah.
will get into all of that coming up shortly. But I do want to take a break from this week because I adore this time of the week when I get to talk to Natasha. Hey,
Ah,
Em,
hey, Em.
how are you?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, despite the busy
Great.
news cycle and
Sure.
information overload, I'm holding it
Mm-hmm.
together pretty well.
How's California?
It's good. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I talked about the power outages with you a bit. Those have now
Right.
stabilized. We've had
Great.
stable power for a few weeks. Got
Mm-hmm.
some snow here in the mountain. It's now since melted.
Yeah.
It's now raining. Yeah, it's very nice. It's very pleasant. So, knock on wood, there's no
Good.
more weather related disasters or anything like that this winter.
So, what'd you watch this past week?
Yeah, so I watched one movie over the weekend that was a rewatch from a long time ago. It was the
Okay.
movie Speed from I think '94. I know, it's so funny.
Yeah,
Oh,
Keanu,
Keanu, yeah.
Sandra
Well,
Bullock.
so my best friend Steph and I, like in junior high, he
Mhm.
was like our top celebrity crush. So we would have little sleepovers. We're like, we're gonna watch Speed, and it was a walk down memory lane while watching it.
Let me ask you a
Sure,
question. What do you think sure, he was a hunk back
sure.
then, but what do you think what do you like best, Keanu then or Keanu now?
I think he's great. I mean, all around, he even now he is oh, I don't know. I guess if I had to pick, I'd probably say then because of course the hunk back then. But I think he's just one of those actors who's been so well respected over the years and never really
Yeah,
did anything to piss anyone off. And from what I hear, he's just like a
sure.
super nice guy
Yeah.
and not so much of a diva, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, just from what I've heard, he just seems like a really great guy. So I think he's one of those rare actors who's kind of
Yeah.
always had this positive response to him, right?
Yeah. I like his longer hair look
I do
now
like the long hair, yeah.
than the short hair of Speed, but Speed was a fun
Yeah,
movie.
those are good times. My boyfriend and I love revisiting those mid-90s movies,
Great.
just kind of a reminiscent of the movies are just not as good these days, you know? It's just harder to
Great call.
find that. So, yeah, that was the one thing I'll bring up. What about you? What did you
Okay.
watch, this past week?
I watched a South Korean film. It's kind of a action horror in a way. It's called I Saw the Devil.
Hmm.
It came out in 2010. An incredible movie. It's a little too long. It doesn't need to be 2 hours and like 30
Oh,
minutes.
sure, yeah, that's a long.
Could be just 2 hours is fine. But what a crazy movie. And I gave it 4 stars.
All
It was
right,
very
right.
fun.
Okay.
Great watch. I Saw the
I Saw the
Devil.
Devil, okay. Yeah, I do love a lot of those Korean movies. There was one called Burning that was really good. I watched a while back.
Okay.
And then also another one, this is on my list. I'm hoping I'll get to watch it this weekend, so maybe next week we can kind of
Mhm.
debrief on it. It's Old Boy, and I believe it's on Netflix. I think you've mentioned that. Yeah.
Okay, so the star of Old Boy is the killer in
Oh,
I Saw the
oh, okay.
Devil.
Interesting.
He is tremendous. He's so good. You're gonna love Old
I think
Boy.
no, it sounds like one of those movies that meets kind of what I look for in a movie.
Yeah, don't read anything about it. Just watch it.
The only thing I know is, like, he wakes up and had amnesia or something, and he was all beat up. That's all I know, something to that effect.
Sure, let's
So
go
let's
with
go
that.
with that, and
Yeah.
yes, hopefully next week. Yeah, it is I'm really hoping I can get to it if I'm not too busy
I
this
can't
weekend, so
wait for you
yeah.
to watch it.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to the interview. As you
Yep.
said, we had so much fun talking with Henry. We just love him. We think he's such a necessary voice in the industry, and we love running
Good way to put it.
columns from him. Yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff. A few things that stood out to me from the interview is he really talks about why he doesn't think the CFPB is going away, which is interesting. He really gives us
Mhm.
his kind of theory behind that, despite there being talks of that possibly happening.
Yeah.
Talks about that among some other, of course, NCUA items. So there's a lot there to get into. We also got into another topic towards the end of the conversation, which we weren't really planning on, about core processors and what parties are held accountable when there's a data breach. And
Yep.
he says a lot of credit unions are just not satisfied with their core system provider overall, which was interesting.
Mhm.
So yeah, we get into that. And then at the end, of course, just like we do with all our guests, we got to know him a little bit better on a personal level. One thing that stood out to me that I loved was he's so serious about his opinions on sports teams that he even has laid down
Yes.
a rule for who his daughters are allowed to support and not support.
It's
It's
so
kind of funny.
funny.
So yeah. All right. We have all that coming up next. Joining us in the virtual studio today is Henry Meier, attorney from the law office of Henry Meier Esquire. Hey, Henry, welcome to Shared Accounts.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. Okay, so Henry, I know we've known you for a long time now. Initially, we knew you when you had a very popular blog back.
Yeah.
You did, yeah. You were senior vice president and general counsel at the New York Credit Union Association. So, kind of came from the credit union league world over there. And today, you send us commentary articles pretty regularly that you write and we publish about a variety of regulatory and compliance issues that are on your mind. And we appreciate those very much.
Oh, yeah.
So, we wanted to expand on that today, talk with you about just kind of what's on your mind in our current regulatory world that's going through lots of changes, as we know, very, very quickly. So let's open up with this, Henry. Can you just kind of start talking about how are the rapid changes that we're seeing right now impacting credit unions? Just coming from Washington and all of these crazy changes. How is it impacting credit unions and how do you think they should be responding?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I feel like I've known you folks for years, even though mainly it's been through emails and back and forth. And you used to, like you said, you used to look at my blog, and I always appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
yeah.
really do appreciate the opportunity to come on and further expound on one of my favorite subjects and a very important subject. Let's face it, these are extremely unique times. There's no other way to put it. So it's possible that at the end of the day, credit unions won't be affected at all, or it's possible at
Oh,
the end of the day, we see fundamental changes made to the structure and to the structure of credit unions. I mean, it's that wide a scope of potential possibilities. Everything's on the
yeah.
table. So the question is, what do you do if you're a credit union to anticipate what's going to happen as much as possible? One is you can only control those things you can control. So
Hmm.
by all means, this is a great time for credit unions to be paying attention to what's going on and seeing what they can help out when they get the call from the leagues or the associations that say, hey, you know what? We need you to reach out to this congressman because we really think that the tax exempt may be on the block, or they may be talking seriously about reorganizing the NCUA so that it's part of a larger banking agency. That's one of the most practical and important things they can do. But in terms of their day-to-day operation, it's important to just keep in mind the stuff that still has an impact on them, like what position are they going to take with regard to overdraft fees?
Hmm.
Will the ascendancy of the new Chairman Kyle have an impact on the way NCUA is scrutinizing the compliance activities, particularly of large credit unions? These are all credit questions which credit unions should be analyzing and should be ready to adjust to quickly once they get the answers.
So, Henry, you just brought it up in these early days of Kyle Hauptman being chairman of the NCUA now. What are your initial thoughts on the changes possibly happening at the NCUA with him at the helm?
Well, what you've already seen is a marked change in tone,
Mm,
and
Mm.
that's welcomed. Frankly, I thought it was becoming needlessly confrontational under Chairman Harper's leadership. I thought that there was a guilty to proven innocent approach, particularly with regard to overdrafts. And I think
hmm
at the very least, you're going to see a change in tone. And if you look at his priorities, particularly with regard to looking at policies that inadvertently make it more difficult for credit unions to serve low income communities and the impact that a decrease in fees, including overdraft fees, could have on those challenges, it is quite refreshing and quite interesting to see that change in tone. That being said, the NCUA, remember, is a three-person board, and you still have two Democratic appointees. And it is going to be difficult to see many fundamental changes in the direction as long as you have a majority of Democratic appointee board members, both of whom have a much more different approach and a different view of what needs to be done from a regulatory standpoint in some issues than does the new chairman.
So, if I could dig into that a little bit, kind of do a couple of follow up questions there. One, the power dynamic hasn't changed. That's what you're saying, even though Hauptman is now at the helm. But him as chairman, I mean, the tone I think is very important. I think that's a really interesting thing you pointed out. But what could change with Hauptman running it?
We have to see, but I do think you're going to see
Sure.
one, different things on the agenda, and you're going to see more behind the scene fights about what is ultimately on the agenda, whether
Mm,
Asuka and former Chairman Harper continue to push for regulations, regulatory proposals be put on the agenda, how
Mhm.
much authority Chairman has to put things on the agenda. These things are all open to debate. Now,
Yeah.
the interesting question, which I don't know the answer to, and I'll be talking to the credit unions I work with to get a sense of this, is in the initial supervisory priorities as laid out in late December, there was going to be a continued emphasis not only on what you'd expect, the credit risk and that type of
Mhm.
thing, the safety and soundness issues, but there was a continued emphasis as well on compliance issues. And we have to see how much authority and how much influence the chairman has to influence those type of on the ground priorities. Even though this type of split has happened before, we have to wait and see how exactly it plays out. So, like so much else that's going on, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
And I'm sorry, I wanted Natasha to ask one more question. It's something that's been on my mind since Hauptman's been appointed, which was just some weeks ago. And honestly, as of this recording, he hasn't even had his first board meeting
Exactly.
as chair. But I do want to ask because it's on our radar. His term is up in August.
Exactly.
And Henry, do you think he's going to stick around?
That would be so much speculation on my part. I don't know anything about it personally. I won't even speculate on that. What I will say is that if history is any guide, one of my favorite expressions, when's the last time anyone ended their term when they were supposed to? And I don't mean that sarcastically. The reality is it takes a while to get a new people appointed. So whether or not he expects to get an additional term, as Chairman Harper did, that's a possibility because that president has now been set. But I don't know what his intentions are, or what the chairman wants to do at this point. Anything's possible.
Yep, time will tell. Lots of possibilities this year, is for sure.
Yep.
Henry, so just sticking with the topic of the NCUA, there was another issue we wanted to ask you about. You recently wrote a piece about the agency finalizing their succession planning mandate.
Yes.
I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that finalized rule on succession planning?
Well, that's interesting. First of all, it is one of those regulations that would come within the halt on promulgating or carrying, executing regulations that have been finalized within the last 60 days. So
Hmm.
that would clearly be something that probably is going to be put on hold. But let's assume that we go forward and that ultimately we look at that regulation. I had nothing against succession planning. I think it's a good idea. When I talk to boards, I think it makes sense, obviously, to have plans in place for how we are going to, who's going to be the next CEO. Do we have a
Hmm.
mechanism in place for replacing board members, for keeping the board fresh? So I have nothing wrong with the prerogative and the idea behind the regulation. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, I don't believe that this is going to be a particularly a meaningful regulation in terms of really helping credit unions stay alive as viable institutions. In other words, there may be some instances where it's a lack of succession planning that leads to a merger, but by and large, if a credit union is going to merge, it does so for other reasons. So I don't know how effective the regulation is going to be in terms of that goal. And I'm always hesitant against putting mandates on boards that are best left to the individual prerogative of the individual board. And I think succession planning, as well intended as the regulation is one of those things.
Well, and to your point, kind of about Hauptman and his tone, I think he has said about this specific rule, he's like, fine. I think he voted for it. It was kind of reluctant, but he was saying, let's look at the data for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And if it shows that it is making a positive impact, fine, we'll keep it. If not, let's get rid of it. That was kind of his stance.
I was just looking at this actually just a little while ago for another reason. I believe he voted against the proposal when it was originally opposed, and then when it was
Hmm.
recently finalized, he did vote in favor of it. But I think that's a good encapsulation of the way he feels about this proposal.
Yeah, I think he negotiated so it'd be a longer time, like every 2 years instead of every 1 year.
Exactly.
I think.
Mm.
Yeah. So we're going to dig down, and I really appreciate your thoughts, Henry. You have no idea how excited I am to have you on. I adore you so much. But I want to get into kind of a state level issue about Illinois and Illinois' Interchange Fee Prohibition Act. It was passed last year. It's back in the news again. Lawsuits have been filed by America's credit unions, ABA, and others, to block that legislation. What questions does this all raise for you as an attorney, this particular level of activity happening in Illinois on this issue?
Well, there's two components to it, and I'm going to put on both my legal hat and my love state level lobbying. It's how I did a lot of it. So I'm going to look
Sure.
at this from two angles. One is, legally speaking, the decision is it's unique in that first the court said that clearly this proposal is preempted as applied to federal credit unions as a matter of federal law.
Mm.
But then it said, by the way, you haven't given me enough evidence. And maybe it's out there, maybe it's not, but you have not given me enough evidence, plaintiffs, that credit unions have the independent authority to bring lawsuits challenging whether or not a state level regulation is preempted as applied to the Credit Union Act, the Federal Credit Union Act.
Mhm.
That is a, you know, I was thinking if I was one of the lawyers representing the credit unions, I would have made the same mistake. I actually think it's axiomatic that as part of a statute, such as an enabling statute, such as the Credit Union Act, it's implicit that you do have the ability to bring these type of lawsuits. That being said, if last I checked, the judge was saying that was accepting more information about that specific issue. I think the time frame for that is passed. I don't think that a subsequent decision has been issued. Now, if in fact that is upheld, the initial logic, and we begin to see that, hey, there's no authority for credit unions to challenge the legality of, or the preemptive, or the applicability of a state level statute to their charter, then that gives us one more level of concern in terms of what we are going to do when you're in a state like New York, where you do get highly aggressive state level regulations and statutes that they always try, understandably so. I would do the same thing if I was on the state level, to apply to as many institutions as possible. So it is going to add one more layer of complication that doesn't really have to be there, and hopefully it gets resolved. Now, that being said, even if the statute itself gets preempted as applied to federal credit unions, there is still the issue of, has the Illinois statute created a template, at least on the state level, for merchants to argue for a way to make it extremely burdensome and necessary for banks and credit unions and other card issuers to reimburse a portion of their surcharge that reflects the taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is yes. It's a highly problematic piece of legislation. And even if I agreed with it, which I don't, on an operational level, it would be extremely difficult to implement. It would be extremely expensive to implement. And for what benefit? We're really not talking about that much money at the end of the day. It clearly is just a way of harassing institutions that charge interchange fees. So from a legislative perspective, I think other states around the country are going to have to keep an eye on it to see if similar models are tried in other states. And from a legal perspective, I do hope we get clarification with regard to the ability of credit unions to challenge state level legislation on preemption grounds.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching that and see if it does indeed go away. So, Henry, let's go and move to another really big topic that's top of mind right now, which is the CFPB. So, the CFPB, historically, from a credit union perspective, the CFPB has kind of played the role of that evil villain in the movie.
Yeah.
Pretty common perspective on it. And now, as we know, Rohit Chopra, the director, is out. Now we have Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent temporarily leading the Bureau. So just what are your initial thoughts, I guess, on what's going on there right now? What are you keeping an eye on most in terms of what regulatory shifts might be coming down the line that will impact credit unions?
Great question. And you were talking about for credit unions, it's the evil villain. I think it's important for credit unions to understand something about the CFPB, and not all of them do, which is even if you're under $10 billion, so if you're over $10 billion threshold, you get directly supervised by the CFPB. But one of the great misconceptions in our public policy level is that the CFPB just applies to the big guys. In fact, they are the interpreter of federal regulation, and they are the enforcer of federal regulation. So even though they may not directly supervise you, those enforcement actions they bring are put against people under $10 billion all the time. And their interpretations are interpretations that you are supposed to abide by. So the CFPB and its activities are crucial no matter what size of your credit union. Second thing is, what is the future of the CFPB going to be? I have a somewhat contrarian view on this issue, which is, and it's part political and in part legal. Okay, banks and financial institutions hate the CFPB. They argue it is too aggressive. It has too much power, particularly in the hands of one man or one woman. And I agree with that completely. That being said, look at the polling. Your average consumer likes the CFPB a lot more than they like banks. And One of the things that Director Chopra did was politicize the public policy part of it. Those press releases he came out with, they got people's attention because they were written for the juggler.
Mm-hmm.
There was no more Mr. Nice Guy. So it's banks ripping people off, it's credit unions not living up to their charter. So as a result, you have an institution that I think for many working class, middle class, and just people in general, they have a favorable view for the CFPB. So it's going to be interesting to see from a political standpoint how much we really do see a reduction in the CFPB's power. Don't get me wrong, we're certainly going to see a reduction. But at the end of the day, I'm not one of these people who think that you're going to see the CFPB done away with. I think it does too many things that people, by and large, agree with for rightly or wrongly. Okay. Second thing about the CFPB is, so what are the realistic reforms if you're not going to go for the home run of doing away with it? Okay. Well, I submitted something to you guys that recently, and one thing I would like to see is a clarification or narrowing of the CFPB's authority to declare a financial product abusive. Now, this is real esoteric, but the bottom line is that authority to, even if a product is not deceptive, to say that it's abusive is extremely expansive.
Yeah.
It's extremely vague. And as a result, critics of the CFPB's approach, it becomes a catch-all for the CFPB to outlaw any practice that it simply doesn't like, which should not be the legal standard. So that's one thing I would like to see. Another thing I would like to see is a return to traditional comment and rulemaking where we have a incremental approach to developing regulations. And my dream would be expand the board so that we don't have simply one person making these huge decisions about every major consumer compliance federal legislation in the country. It's just too much power to give to one person. So that's the direction I'm going to be seeing the CFPB in. Now, in the short term, the question is going to be, well, what happens to the existing regulations? In other words, there are plenty of regulations, such as the small business lending law and such as the open banking law, which technically don't fall within that window that the Trump administration has told regulators to put a hold on. That being said, let's be practical. If they don't want to see something become a regulation, it's not going to become a regulation. That's not legal, that's just practical. Okay. So the real thing I'm going to be looking for in the short term is what regulations do we start seeing requests for comment being made or being slowed down, and which ones do we see ultimately take effect? What I'm warning credit unions against is don't assume that just because a Republican's in charge that you will necessarily see an end to some of these regulations and proposals. What you will see, I will say, is an end of the aggressive enforcement actions. You're not going to see as many of those, which by itself is extremely helpful. So last thing I want to see is it's something that the chairman mentioned when he took control of the NCUA. We have to do away with regulation by enforcement. We have to do away with this notion that, okay, every credit union, or bank for that matter, should be paying so much attention to who we enforce regulations against and take legal actions against, that you should know all the facts and understand the impact that's going to have on the way we interpret and enforce regulations. That is asking too much, and it's not a particularly effective way of putting people on notice of the type of regulations they have to abide by.
Henry, let me say one thing really quick, just because you brought it up about the potential dismantling of the CFPB. I was just listening to a House Financial Services Committee hearing this morning. I was just watching it. Representative Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, I don't have the direct quote in front of me. It's on my notebook at my desk, but he said he was looking forward to abolishing the CFPB with this administration. So just saying.
Like I said, it could happen. I kind of compare this to like we've had a tidal wave, okay? And eventually the tidal wave is going to ebb.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, and I don't like to say maybe I'm wrong, but maybe we're in such a unique time, which is entirely possible, that we start seeing these major changes. But I do believe at some point it's going to calm down. Yeah. And I do believe that when push comes to shove, when you look at where people are politically and where you look at the thing that everyone has in common, if you look at the base of the Republican Party and the base of the Democratic Party, what they all have in common is a belief that government has gotten to the point where it is structurally out to either be indifferent or harmful to the working class. Now, you can agree or
Mhm.
disagree with that, but when that's your premise, and when you have a senator from Massachusetts who can pretty much agree with some of what the Republicans say about the disregard of the working class, I
Mhm.
don't see the CFPB going away. But again, this is such a unique environment. Who knows?
Yeah. And I will say, we're going to put in the show notes, you've been kind of referencing a column you wrote called Two Reforms to Rein in the CFPB. It's on our website. Put a link in the show notes so everybody can read it. But one more quick question, though, Henry, for you about the CFPB. Just because I was on a press call with America's Credit Union's Chief Advocacy Officer, Carrie Hunt, this week, and she was saying on that call that she expects many of the lawsuits that they have filed jointly and, or by themselves, filed against the CFPB for a number of different reasons over the years, that those lawsuits might just simply go away. And I wanted to ask you, since we're having this conversation today, is it that simple?
Yeah, it basically is.
Okay.
Because what's going to happen is, let's say, I'll give you an example. Right now, the small business lending regulation, which would make credit unions and banks that do a certain amount of small business loans to
Mm-hmm.
report demographic information about their small business loans, that is currently being appealed. The refusal to give an injunction is being appealed to the Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit.
Right.
Now, that's still being litigated by the Bureau. There were just all arguments on yesterday. But if in fact the Bureau could turn around tomorrow and say, you know what, there's been a settlement, we don't want to go forward with this, we don't want to defend it anymore, it could be that simple.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want to defend something, you don't have to. Now, if you want to get into really interesting inside baseball, one of the things that was going on last week was in that lawsuit I was talking about, there was an attempt by a couple of associations to get standing to defend the lawsuit. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
they said, you know what, we know the CFPB is trying to defend it, but we want to be defendants as well. You could get into questions about whether or not someone can take the side to enforce the regulation if the CFPB does not do. But generally, I agree completely with Kerry, who's much more knowledgeable about the goings on in Washington than I'll ever be, which if they want to end the lawsuit, basically they will atrophy.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for
You
explaining
do
that,
have to be
Henry.
careful, though. One thing I'll say is you have to make a distinction. It's not like all lawsuits are going to end. There are some interesting lawsuits going on that will last regardless of what the CFPB does. And I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
two of those. One is one which is not getting the amount of attention it deserves, it should be getting, which is a case out of the great state of New York. Just joking. But the, the attorney general there is successfully arguing and has succeeded in defending against a motion to dismiss a lawsuit brought against Citibank, in which she is arguing basically that those wire transfers, which are not traditionally considered to be covered under the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, are in fact covered under the defenses of the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, which
Mm-hmm.
would shift liability to credit unions for potentially hundreds and thousands of dollars when you look
Oh,
at the
crap.
type of money that is transferred over the traditional wire system. So that's one to keep an eye out for. Another one
Okay.
that the CFPB jumped onto was a lawsuit involving Capital One, in which the parties are alleging that Capital One basically engaged in deceptive, what the CFPB referred to as bait and switch tactics, when it opened up two accounts, one
Yeah.
with a high interest yield, the other with an almost identical name with minimal benefits. And they're arguing that that action itself, even though it was properly disclosed, constitutes a deceptive practice. That's going to
Mm.
continue because that's a private action.
Yep.
All right. Okay, Henry, just one final question before we move on to the latter part of our interview here. We recently saw that you posted on LinkedIn about a new crisis communications project that you're working on. Could you tell our listeners about this a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Wes.
Yeah.
That's something I'm working on with one of your old colleagues from the Credit Union Times, Sarah Koch, who I'm lucky enough to have working with me
Mm-hmm.
as well,
Great.
help keep my
Yeah,
name out there. And
right.
although it's very much a work in progress, the bottom line is that Sarah's experience has been that when she talks about crisis communication, many credit unions end up saying, I could have also used an attorney during the process.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what we are doing is saying, hey, you know what? Get us as a package where you have someone who's experienced, like Sarah, in developing that communications plan, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have myself who can help credit unions make sure that their disaster preparedness policies, procedures are aligned with regulation. And in the event that something does come up where you do need to have advice quickly, you know who you're going to go to and you have an additional source to go to. So that is the thinking behind it. And it's evolving, but it's something we're both excited about.
Very good. Combining you and Sarah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with Sarah. She's been phenomenal, and she's done a great job in keeping my name out there, which is always one of the main goals when you've gone on your own. So it's been great.
Well, very good.
Okay,
Glad
well,
to
best
hear
of
it.
luck with that. Yeah, I was gonna say that's important now, just with all the data breaches that have been happening and
Exactly.
the banking systems going down, a lot of upset
Oh, Jesus.
members.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes to mind. But yeah, I'm sure there's many scenarios. So
If I could go on that a little, even though it's a little off what we were talking about, in addition to the regulatory issues, which are highly important, one of the key issues for credit unions, you folks that are on the industry constantly, I talk to a lot of credit unions. I don't talk to one credit union that is satisfied with their core processor or has had
Oh, no.
oh
this,
wow.
this great experience with this core processor. And one of the issues is going to be how do we develop a system or how do we get particularly all credit unions, because even your biggest credit union is pretty small to some of these core processes.
Yeah.
So there are the things we can do to give credit unions more leverage, more of an even playing field when it comes to negotiating and working with these core processes so that when a data breach does occur and when negligence does take place, you have a realistic means of holding the breaching party responsible. Because right
Yeah.
now, we just don't have that leverage. So that's going to be an interesting issue as well. I would love to see Congress do something. So in addition to all the regulatory stuff, that would be something I would like to see as well.
If I could, to your point on that, Henry, again, back to this House Financial Services Committee hearing I was covering this morning, one side of the political aisle was trying to bring that issue up. The other side was not interested in it. So I'll let you figure out what side is what,
Yeah.
but it is being talked about somewhat.
It is. And unfortunately, so much in Washington now is becoming politicized that this is just common sense.
Yeah.
This is not Republican, Democrat. This is, gee, every American is dependent on having a safe cyber infrastructure. And we do not have the national regulatory framework and obligations so that all institutions, not just banks, not just credit unions, not just, for frankly, hospitals, have to abide by these baseline basic things. And we have to start making vendors more responsible as well. Otherwise, small institutions such as credit unions are going to be at too much of a disadvantage. It's totally preventable.
Yeah. In this environment, I believe my shoe size is political.
Yeah.
You know, everything is.
It is. If you're saying it's big, I don't know what that means, but you're either a Republican or Democrat. I gotta.
Yeah. Hey, it's 11, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I don't know, whatever that means. Okay.
All right. Well, we could talk to you for hours about all this stuff, but let's go ahead and take a break from the serious legal and regulatory talk. We're going to move on to the fun part of the interview, which is all about you. Okay. So, Henry, first question. Where are you from originally? What's your hometown?
I am from Glen Head, New York, on Long Island.
Okay.
I grew up in suburban Long Island so that people wouldn't forget where we lived. I went to North Shore High School.
Okay.
Vintage Long Island there. Like, okay, we live on the North Shore. We want you to know that. And then that's where I grew up. My mother, who's going to be celebrating her 90th birthday in a couple of days, she still lives there.
Great.
I have a couple of sisters and a brother who still live there as well.
Nice.
Where do you live now?
Right now, I live in Delmar, New York, which is a suburb right outside of Albany. It reminds me a lot of where I grew up, but it's about $200,000 cheaper. So that's the one advantage of upstate New York. You don't have quite the expenses that you do as you get closer to downstate.
Very nice. Happy birthday to your mom. That is
absolutely
amazing.
Thank you. She does not want to admit it's her 90th, but I think it's quite the accomplishment. So
okay. Are you planning a party or get together or anything to celebrate that?
Actually, that's been very much the subject of a family discussion. Mom has decided she wants a low-key affair.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
This is how much my family loves football. We typically have not concentrated too much on my mom's birthday because it always is right around the Super Bowl.
Okay.
And we used to have a big neighborhood party around the Super Bowl. And when I mean big, it used to be huge. So that was always a point of emphasis and not so much mom's birthday. Now, that's the way mom wanted it. She grew up, my father was a huge sports fan, and we all huge sports fans. So bottom line is, I will be going down to say happy birthday, Mom, but it's not going to be a big deal.
Okay. What's your mom's name?
Eleanor.
Eleanor, happy birthday. That is wonderful. This is a question I've never asked you, Henry, and I always wanted to. Just very quickly, why did you become a lawyer?
With the caveat that my new goal is to figure out what I want to do before I retire,
Mm-hmm.
I became a lawyer in part because when I was working at the New York State Legislature, right after graduating, I went to school at American University in D.C., ended
Oh,
up getting my first political job in Albany. And it was obvious to me that most of the people who were doing the stuff that I most enjoyed doing were lawyers. So one of it was a real practical thing. The other thing was something you hear about all the time. It's a cliche, but from a very young age, I like to read and I like to
yeah.
argue. So everyone used to say, "Oh, you're going to be a lawyer someday," and sure enough,
Yeah.
I think that kind of clicked in. Plus, on a pure practical level, my dad had a small business as an accountant, and it
Mm-hmm.
became obvious in very short order that I would not be following in my father's footsteps because of some rather questionable math skills. So law
Accounting
was always an
sucks.
obvious.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, sounds like a perfect fit.
Great story.
Okay, so related to that, on TV, movies, laws, often a topic. Lots of legal TV shows out there. Do you have a favorite law TV show or lawyer that you watched?
I was thinking about this. I'll show my age again. The can't miss show when I was in college or maybe a senior high school was LA Law. So
Sure.
that was always a fun one. But really, the one that I've always enjoyed the most was the best book I ever read was Presumed Innocence by Scott Turow. And to this day,
Oh,
I say it's phenomenal. And then they did a good job recently of reinterpreting it for Apple. If anyone's looking for something
yeah.
to binge watch, they recently did come out with a reinterpretation, I'm going to call it, of the book.
Oh,
So
It was so good.
it was good. They put a fresh new angle on something, and I thought it was great.
Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, no, that was a fun reimagination because what Harrison Ford
Yeah,
was in the movie
exactly. And if
of
you remember,
years ago.
Raul Julia, I think, was the defense
Yeah,
lawyer Sandy Stern, who, if I had to pick, like your ex, the
yeah.
favorite fictional defense lawyer, he would be the one because they do a great job of depicting. I always said that a criminal defense lawyer, which is one of my roads not taken,
Yeah,
has to be a cynical idealist. And I think that he kind of encapsulates that
sure.
ethos perfectly.
I always thought LA Law was like if cocaine was a legal show. It was just so wound up.
Yeah, it was. And the
But
great thing about it was they
yeah.
never had to write anything.
No.
All they had to do was go into court and without any research, they would just be able to do
Yep.
anything. I think that got a lot of people sucking into going to law school until they
Yeah.
realized that 90% of the law is writing.
Yeah.
You can get by without speaking if that's your goal, but the one thing you
All
can't
right.
do, if you can't write, you shouldn't be a lawyer. Now, that's
Sure.
not true of all lawyers, but if you went by law and order,
Yeah.
excuse me, LA law, that would basically be
LA
it.
Law. Okay. So I want to move on. We just have a couple of questions left. You are a sports fan, like you said, in New
Very much
York.
so.
Baseball fan, yeah?
Yep.
All right. Which team do you hate the most
Oh, that's
as a New York fan? Phillies or Red Sox?
Red Sox, absolutely.
Okay.
There's nothing I love to see more than the only team I dislike more than the Red Sox. I'm also a hockey fan, and if
Okay.
you grew up on Long Island, there used to be a huge rivalry, and there still is to a certain extent, between the New York Rangers and the New York Islanders.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to go to those games all the time, and I used to tell people that if you want to understand the causes of the Yugoslavian conflict or any ethnic conflict, go to those games and you
Oh, my
realize
God.
how silly and violent people can become. So
Yeah.
that was always fun. But that's the one thing. I have two daughters, and I'm always telling them you can root for any team you want, except for the Red Sox and the
Hmm.
Rangers. So that's the two things.
oh boy.
Way to put your flag down. You're so right about learning about historical conflicts through hockey.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's good.
Yeah, love that. Okay, Henry, just going back to your young adulthood again here, what was the first album that you ever bought or remember like listening to all the
The
time?
first album I remember listening to, I'll give you two.
Okay.
I have a twin brother, and I remember going out to Roosevelt Field where he got his first album, and it was Supertramp Breakfast in America. And I listened to it again
Awesome.
about a month ago. It's a phenomenal album.
Yeah.
But the first album that I really listened to over and over again and still do to this day is Who's Next. I fell in love with The Who. So Who's Next, Quadrophenia. I have most of the Who albums.
Yeah.
And then I'm man enough to admit that there were a couple of classic plays I liked as well. So I believe it or not, there used to be this play 1776 which used to be on every July 4th, and I used
Mhm.
to love that. And then West Side Story.
Oh, I love West Side Story
Oh,
so
nice.
much.
Yeah.
You know whose favorite album was also Supertramp?
Who?
That particular album? Brooke Shields.
Me and Brooke. You see, that's what it is.
You and Brooke?
Me and Brooke. I always knew we had this kind of connection. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right, last question here, Henry. What was the last movie you watched?
Last movie I watched. That's a good question because you're gonna have to help me out. It's the one about the World War II photographer who was a former model.
God, what was
It's
that?
awful. Is it Harper? No. It's
No,
yeah.
I'm
You
gonna
know
have
what
to
I'm
look
talking
that
about,
up.
right?
I do know Andy Samberg's in it.
Yeah, Andy Samberg and is it the woman from Titanic who's in it?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't think
Oh,
of the
Kate
name.
Winslet.
I'm looking it up.
I would ask my wife if she remembers. I actually saw that at my brother's suggestion, and it's one of the best movies I've seen in a while.
Is it Lee?
Exactly. Yeah. Great,
Lee.
great movie. For those of you who haven't seen it, even though I couldn't remember the name, it's very much worth watching.
I haven't seen it, but yeah, it's called Lee.
Yeah,
Lee.
it's great. But what I do find now is so many of the things that used to be in movie theaters are now basically being dropped right away.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I just got through with Homeland, which to me,
Oh, yeah.
it's almost as good as a movie. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found myself watching fewer movies, but more stuff on Netflix. Like I know we're out of time, but you know how David Lynch passed away recently?
Yeah.
But he did one of my favorite TV shows of the 80s,
Oh, Twin
Twin
Peaks.
Peaks. But then if you look at the show Severance, which is directed by Ben Stone, I actually think Severance is the grandson of Twin Peaks stylistically.
Good point.
I'm really enjoying that as well.
It's a great show. All right.
So if you guys want, I will do an arts column for the CU Times as well because
Please.
I'm willing to give my opinion on just about anything. That's what you want. I can give it to you.
Damn right we want it, Henry. That'd be wonderful.
All right.
Okay, Henry. So just to close us out here quickly, where can people find you and connect with you if listeners want to reach out?
If you want to reach out, it's the Law Office of Henry Meier. You can Google me. I have a website, and also every time I do a article for you folks, it's 518-223-5126. If you're ever interested in discussing things, and if I could just do a little plug, my specialty is I will do the traditional legal work, the contract reviews, which I love doing, stuff like that. And I like to think of myself as the general counsel's help. So the type of conversation we had today, which is, okay, what's going to be happening 6 months to a year? I think that's a conversation that's absolutely crucial for credit unions to have. And to get a good answer, you need to know both, not only the legal environment, but the regulatory and legislative environment as well. So that's what I'm here for. And if people want to continue the conversation, I'd appreciate it. And so would my kids' college fund. So
Right, absolutely.
Henry, we believe you are crucial, and we love you and appreciate you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to write for the CU Times. It's a great publication, and it's great to get my voice out there. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Henry. Really appreciate it. All right. And to all of our listeners, thank you for downloading today's show. Please subscribe to Shared Accounts with CU Times in all of those normal podcast places. And we'd also love it if you would share the episodes with, I don't know, your coworkers and or maybe even relatives you don't like very much. Maybe that'll make them change their tune about you.
Exactly. And please, please feel free to rate us 5 stars only, if you will. As always, thank you so much to our producer, Zach Nyheisel. Thanks, Zach. Join us again next week for a new episode of Shared Accounts with CU Times. Until then, thanks for listening.